Well, hey there, it's me, Big Ugly Jim. What am I gonna yammer about now? Did we get all the things people were talking about? I think so. What's the next topic so we can research it? I don't know. I'll give you a second. The next thing, what did I have on here? Evolution. I want to talk about evolution. So I'll give you, 30 seconds to just quickly, type in what is evolution, and I'm sure we'll have lots of information pop up. Again, I've been watching a lot of people who really don't understand evolution. 100% CPU. Yeah, there's no way I'm going to be able. I was going to play a clip of Blair, whatever their name is, just perfectly expressing the stupidity. This actually came from the video that she did about neopronouns, and because while she's trans, she's also conservative, so she had to take the worst possible take on everything, and sucks at life and probably deserves to get educated in some way, but it probably ain't gonna happen. Anyways, at one point she brought up some actor on some TV show who did an interview where he was like, my pronouns are tree and tree self, because we all come from trees, and that's what I want to be, that's how I want to identify. Now, in my head, when I hear that, I just think, okay, well, I don't fucking get to tell you how the world is, so, if that's what works, that's what works. I also feel like that's someone who's learning stuff, and I don't know that they're gonna, at the age of 80, they're gonna be like, no, please, tree. But if they do, ain't my business. Camera then goes, Blair's face, and she said something about like, come from trees. I thought we came from monkeys. And this is a common piss off that I'm going to foam at the mouth about for a second. So I've given you guys lots of time to do a little Googling on evolution. The only time you've heard the word tree self is today, the times I've said. Totally. I don't think this is even a thing. I think this is one person had an interview, said a thing, and idiots want to comment on it, like me. So, anyways, the idea of we came from monkeys. There is a book by Richard Dawkins, who is not the voice of progress, but is definitely knowledgeable about evolution. It is called what the fuck is it? The Ancestor's Tale, I think. It's based on the Canterbury Tales, which I don't know if anyone's read the Canterbury Tales, but it's essentially you have a group of people who are traveling. It's from like 1200 AD or BC or CE or whatever words we use. And it's a bunch of people who are traveling. It's Chaucer, by the way, and are passing the time as they go down the road, along the way, telling stories. And each chapter of the book is a different story. So there'll be like the nun's story or the farm girl's story or whatever. It's been a long time since I don't think I finished reading it, but I read chunks of it. I own it. I feel like I can, have it on a bookshelf and be like, oh yes, Chaucer. But essentially, the Ancestor's Tale is in that style of Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, but looking at going back in time and speculating about our ancestry. And the key thing that when people talk about, well, didn't we come from monkeys? No, we didn't come from monkeys. We have a common ancestor with monkeys. In fact, we're closer related to bonobos. I believe that I've heard, and I don't know if it's valid or not, but I believe that I've heard that you can actually make a human bonobo chimera that is viable as an embryo, which means we're awful fucking close to bonobos, which makes sense because they fuck all the time. That's how they resolve their problems. I feel like they're smarter than we are. But we have a common ancestor with monkeys. If you go back far enough in time, there will be a point where two groups of monkeys split, and they would have had a parent who, was essentially the originator of both lines, and through various evolutionary forces, things like the environmental isolation. So maybe one group of monkeys went to a different area and they didn't encounter each other anymore. And again, monkeys is the wrong word. But they evolved in different directions. The and that's how, different environmental pressures they reacted to differently through mutation, and they became eventually different things. Now, evolution is very real. We can actually see evolution in practice with things like COVID. I don't know, maybe you guys have heard about how COVID keeps evolving, but a more interesting example is actually bed bugs. There is two real types of bed bugs. There's bed bugs that piss off humans, and there's bed bugs that piss off bats. And they are the same species, but you wouldn't know it to look at them. The ones that work with bats are physically, visually very different. They are distinct, and they are still capable of having viable offspring, which is where the line, a lot of cladistics says that that's the line between where two things become separate species, is when they're no longer able to have viable offspring. So if you think about a mule, a donkey, and a horse are capable of having offspring, but that offspring is sterile. They're incapable of reproducing, so it's not a viable offspring. I think that's the key. But I'm not an evolutionary biologist. If only Dongo were here. The thing with the bed bugs is we're actually at a point where they're almost speciated. They're almost two distinct species. The viability of their offspring is becoming less and less, and within our lifetimes, there will be two types of bed bug where once there was one. And fortunately for humans, some of them can fuck off and eat bats for a while, and leave us the fuck alone. So to me, that's an interesting thing. Common things that people don't understand about evolution is it's not got any intent behind it. People always get really uppity when you say words like chance or fluke or whatever, but that's what this is. So I talked a little while ago about Tiktaalik, which was a transitional fossil that we found that essentially is a large fish that its fins developed into like shoulder action, which is not what fins normally would do, and they were able to push themselves up. At the same time, they developed the capacity to gulp air and get oxygen from gulping air as opposed to just getting it through gills. So they were still fish, but they had these two things that were unique, and that allowed them to get into areas where the water was much shallower, where there was a whole pile of food to eat, like other fish that were small, that could survive in poorly oxygenated water. And they could eat those fish and therefore, have a good life full of full tummies and happy days, which means that reducing the stress on them for food makes them more likely to survive, and therefore more likely to get their fuck on, swim back into the ocean, find another similar fish, get their stuff, and have the likelihood of that those mutations passing on. So it's not, we have this ridiculous idea that some fish was like, I'm going to go on the land. And he jumped on the land, and then he jumped back, and he was like, what an amazing story. I'm going to tell my children. And then those children were like, they jumped on the land, but then they did a second jump, and then they jumped. Like, this is not how evolution works. It's not intended for a solution. What happened was some fish, all the other fish are like, wouldn't it be cool if we go over there and fuck those little fish up? And this particular fish with its wonky, everyone hates you for having shoulders, arms, that fish was like, I think I can do this. Swim, 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 push himself up, gulp some air. I'm fucking breathing. This is awesome. I'm gonna eat. That worked. There was no intention. There was no direction. Humans are not the end goal of evolution. This is one of those things that makes me giggle. We have common ancestors with all life, because at some point there was the weird thing that happened, whatever that looks like, where life began. So at some point, there was protoplasm, goo, whatever. The common thing that is talked about is random puddle of ooze, lightning, thunder, boom, kapow, and simple strands of protein form as a result of the reaction. And those were self-replicating and eventually led to RNA and eventually led to DNA, and that led to single-celled organisms. So all life coming from presumably one lightning strike, one random set of circumstances, means that we're related to all the things that are alive. We're not related to rocks, but we are related to carrots. So when we say that we evolved from monkeys, that's incorrect. What we're actually saying is we evolved from a species that was common to us and monkeys. And those lines hit at this point. There's a word that gets used a lot called Mitochondrial Eve. And that refers to a particular female who, if you go far back in time enough, would have been the maternal progenitor of all humans. All lines of humanity would eventually go back to this one person. Now that sounds ridiculous. Mitochondrial Eve might not be even human, might be far removed in terms of evolution, but at some point, all humanity diverged, and that point is Mitochondrial Eve. And mitochondrial Adam, presumably. But anyways, babble. So when people say stupid things like, well, if we evolved from monkeys, how come they still monkeys? Because we didn't evolve from monkeys, and when I was born, I didn't murder my parents. Like, the fuck? Evolution continues to happen. We see examples of behavioral evolution. So animals that we're realizing are capable of utilizing tools that have not done so in the past. I'm thinking specifically of chimpanzees. There's a group of chimpanzees that hunt with spears. And I can't remember the name of the animal. It's these other primates with adorably big eyes. They're called like butter buggers or some ridiculous name like that. They love eating these things. They're delicious. And they also hide and they sleep during the day. They're nocturnal. Sleep during the day and they hide in holes in trees. And so some monkey somewhere along the way, or some chimpanzee, sorry, somewhere along the line, took a stick, stuck it in one of those holes, and pulled out a bugger boodle schnoodle pop, whatever the fuck they're called, and was like, this is a good thing. And the way we found out about this is a researcher was following this group of chimpanzees, and they started fashioning spears, which is not normal chimpanzee behavior. They literally were ripping branches off and sharpening them on the rocks to make points, because points go into things a lot easier. And I was like, that's fucking amazing. That's an example of like a social evolution. I don't know if it means actual physical evolution, because I don't know enough about the structure of monkey brains and whether this is a new adaptation or it's simply something that a group has figured out and has passed on to their children. But it's fucking cool. I watched a documentary on the exorcism of Annalise Michel. I think it was a combination of Munchausen syndrome by both her parents, by proxy, and herself, and a case of folie à deux. Sorry, yes, folie à deux. When we talk about evolution, I always default to our stupidity and religion. Yes, religion is a means to answer the unanswerable questions, and unfortunately, then science comes along and goes, oh, unanswerable, you say? Let me. I was reading an article about bacteria evolving on the ISS, used to argue with my pops, who's diehard Christian, about the theory of evolution. Yep. Those are tough conversations. Apparently my father has become an evolution denier in his old age, so that's cool. But intelligent design, Jim. I love the concept of intelligent design. And the reason I love it, I thought it up when I was like 10 years old. And I was hearing about evolution, and I was hearing that we came from dinosaurs and all this shit. And in my 10-year-old brain, I was like, this makes sense. If you think about it, why would our God not use previously designed things, right? So if you've already made a monkey, shave him a little bit, make him stand upright, okay, now we got a person. Makes sense. the fact that I was 10-year-old me and thought this up, and that religious scholars haven't figured out that 10-year-old me was a fucking idiot. There are eelfish that can live on land and in mud. They are disgusting. They can be a serious problem on highways in Mississippi. Yeah, lungfish are another one. There's a bunch of fish that have the capacity to breathe oxygen from the air. And probably those have a common ancestor with Tiktaalik. In fact, realistically, anything that's on land pretty much is likely to. Well, I guess they're not on land, but yeah, they're that evolutionary. It may have been multiple times that that capacity appeared. I'm not an expert. I can't remember what the word for that is. Like convergent evolution or something like that, where the same mutation can happen in different isolated groups. But yeah, so most likely the mud skippers and things like that all have a common ancestor, and that's particularly badass to me. Let's see. In a said argument with my pops, he kept reverting to why aren't monkeys still evolving into people now? I can answer that. I'm sure you probably already know the answer, but I'm going to say it anyways. The reason monkeys aren't evolving into people is because people wasn't the end goal of evolution. So the way that this works is you have a viable pair of monkeys that, whether they're chased away or they get isolated on a landlocked environment, or in some way they become separate from the rest. And it doesn't have to be two; it can be as many as you want. But different evolutionary pressures are in the space of their. There's a fascinating example of this. There is a stream, I think it's in South America, the exact same kinds of fish, the exact same, essentially the same genetic makeup, like they're the same species, but there is the way that this stream went is some of the fish on one side, some of the fish on the other side, and nary the two shall meet. There's no longer a capacity for them to intermingle because of the the structure of the river or what have you. The one path of this river has large, smooth, shiny rocks. The other path has mud. So the fish that live in the shiny rock area have shiny fish scales. The fish that live in the sandy area are darker in color and all that kind of jazz. Why is that? It's not because they were like, we should probably go darker. It's because evolutionarily, anything that was shiny in a place where there's lots of shiny things would blend in, and prey flying over top wouldn't see it as easily, so it would have a greater chance of survival and be able to get its fuck on. Likewise, if it was in the muddy area, it would stand out from things above. So it's not that there was an intention to make one shiny and one dull, is that the environmental pressures said that any mutation that would result in less shine in this stream and more shine in that stream would be favorable from the conditions and would be more likely to pass on. That's all this is. Do I believe in Sabe, Bigfoot? And if so, where is Sabe on our evolutionary scale? I don't believe in Bigfoot, but I also don't think that I am the be-all and end-all of knowledge on any topic. If there is a Bigfoot, and I'm speaking entirely in the theoretical, which again is not a thing I believe in, they would be closely associated with humans, probably more closely than bonobos. It is not without reasonable believability that a early human, like a Cro-Magnon or what have you, could have wound up here, for example. There are reasons to believe that people accidentally made the voyage from China to South America. And by accidentally, I mean the speculation is that it was a fisherman in a boat who wound up, getting taken out to sea and survived the trip. It was not an intended, like, I'm going to see if there's a whole world out there. Most people didn't do that. As soon as you can see that the world ends and there's no other land, most peoples didn't do that. A notable exception is the Haida, who Haida Gwaii is and I'm not again a geologist, but there's a whole bunch of islands I believe that sort of make up Haida Gwaii, and some of them are not visible from any of the other islands. So that means that those indigenous people would have, and like time would not have changed this from everything we know. Those indigenous people would have said, you know what? I bet there is something out farther than I can see, and taken a shot and gone there. I don't know. I think that's cool. I think that's seriously cool. But there is a bunch of stuff in South America, art-wise, that we found from archaeological digs that is strikingly similar to art being manufactured at the similar time in China or in and around that time. And that's the speculation, is that maybe somebody at that point on a makeshift boat, for all intents and purposes, managed to survive the journey across the ocean. I bring this up because is it completely unbelievable that another human many, many years earlier could have gone through the same voyage and wound up establishing a group of living human people that environmentally were isolated in the mountains or whatever, and that their particular path of evolution took them to Sasquatch. It's certainly not impossible. I don't subscribe to the idea simply because arrogantly I think that we would have encountered Sasquatch or Bigfoot or Sabe. Sabe? Yes, Sabe. And I don't know if I'm saying that right. It could be like Sabe and I'm just an idiot. But that's my take on it. But again, what I don't know about the world is a bunch. So me believing or disbelieving in something is pretty much not evidence of it being true or false. There are monkeys because monkeys still existed, and we became isolated from, when there was a common ancestor, the two lines diverged, and they may have diverged quite wildly from geologically or geospatially. We'll go with geospatially, and would have gone down completely different roads in terms of evolution. But that doesn't mean that one replaces the other, and this is a common mistake people make. And it's not, another common mistake isn't that two monkeys had baby and that baby was a human and they're like, oh, we'll name him Rick. We're talking about millions of little tiny changes over millions of years, where certain things are advantageous and pass on. I'll give you an example of another piece of cool science around that. Sickle cell anemia. I think I've talked about this before, but I'm going to talk about it again because I think it's cool. Sickle cell anemia essentially is a mutation to the shape of red blood cells, and it makes them look like a sickle. That's why it's called that. Cool. Sickle cell anemia is a condition that very, very significantly targets black people. And it is a form of anemia, thus the name. So a large number of black people, I think it's primarily black men, but I could be wrong about all of this. But a significant proportion of black men, black women, black whatever, have this condition where it's a form of anemia. So it's an iron disorder. And I think what's fair to say is that in today's world, sickle cell anemia, I don't think it's a very fatal thing. I think it's more of a nuisance thing. We take iron supplements and we're good. It's an annoyance. But once upon a time, it absolutely, we didn't know about iron supplements, and it could very well have been a very, very fatal condition. What's interesting about that, because it doesn't sound like an advantageous evolutionary scenario. My understanding is that even if it was fatal, you would live a good long time before you would die of sickle cell anemia. The same mutation causes a greater resistance to malaria. So this mutation occurred, I believe, in Africa, where malarial mosquitoes were a thing, and the people who had this mutation would have been more likely to survive long enough to procreate. So if they were, able to withstand anemia, or sorry, malaria. So that gene would have passed on, even though it was a gene that could have killed you. Similarly, if you think about a mutation that causes Alzheimer's, or anything that occurs later in life, would not prevent you from having offspring and therefore passing it on. So it's a fascinating concept where some people probably had what are ultimately bad mutations. I don't think sickle cell anemia is a bad mutation, because I think surviving malaria is probably way better. But surviving, or having a mutation for something like, skin cancer wouldn't have killed you when you were 3. It would have killed you when you were, maybe 35 or 25 or whatever. But by then you've probably got your fuck on and passed on that gene. So it can be a negative mutation that passes on anyways. It's a whole wild thing. Sugar says black men mostly, and they thought it was contagious at one point and used it as an excuse to not allow black men to travel. Did they think it was contagious? I wasn't aware of that. I certainly using it as an excuse to not let black men travel. Pretty much that's like the honkiest thing I've ever heard. How honky can that be? We have a long history of preventing travel for people for the most ridiculous of reasons. I would not at all be surprised about them saying, "Oh yeah, sickle cell anemia. Don't want to catch that. Can't let the black folks go traveling." But yeah, it's as far as I know, it's not contagious. It's entirely based on a mutation that has passed on successfully because of its correlated resilience to malaria. So the nice thing about white history is there's a lot to learn, because we fuck up a lot. And it's nice that we have the luxury of learning new things when we fuck up. I'm kidding, we don't learn. I was watching a video the other day. There's a guy, another YouTuber whose name is Bo of the Fifth Column. I love his content. If you're not following him, I strongly suggest you do. Really, really excellent. He's a Florida man, and very much a lefty, but also like a very intelligent, understands things like foreign policy, the military, and is very much like a rugged, sort of rednecky kind of guy. And I don't mean redneck in the heel kind of way. I mean redneck in the working in the sun kind of vibe. Very interesting guy, and someone wrote him an email. He gets this quite a lot, where people will ask him to make a video. He makes very short, like 3 to 10 minute videos about particular topics. And this one was, I believe it was from a black person who was saying, my grandmother is saying she's not going to get vaccinated because of the Tuskegee Experiment. Can you, do a video that tells her that she's wrong and she needs to do this? And he took the exact right approach, and that was, I can't tell her she's wrong. I absolutely can't. First off, I'm a honky, and we're not the heroes of the story of the Tuskegee Experiment. We're the villains. So for a white person to come in and be like, actually, m'lady, that's just bad and wrong. More importantly, he's like, I don't know how old your grandmother is, but the Tuskegee Experiment is not long ago. This is probably something that happened when she was, very much aware. And so she's right. He said, science did this to black people. If you're not familiar, the Tuskegee Experiment was, and I'm not by any means an expert on it, but it was looking at syphilis. And what they did was they intentionally infected a bunch of black men over a very long period of time with syphilis without telling them, and documented their findings. That sounds very evil and genocidal, doesn't it? Oh, science. Another example that he didn't bring up, but that I'm a bit familiar with, is HeLa cells. There's a book that I used to own. I gave it to a buddy of mine because it was right up his alley, called The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. And Henrietta Lacks was a real woman, dirt poor, black woman living in the South, and she had cervical cancer. And she went for a biopsy. And the doctor who did the biopsy noticed that the particular way that her cancer and her cells interacted, they lived. The cells wouldn't die. You could not, that you could kill them, but if you just left them, they would continuously reproduce. It's very much an immortal strain of human cells. And this is a huge thing. It was theorized that there would be immortal cells based on a variety of things. This was the first time someone found them. And he did the work, he patented, all that kind of stuff, and made a huge amount of money selling HeLa cells, which are used everywhere for safe testing against human tissue, among many other things. Guess how much money Henrietta Lacks got for that? Guess how much recognition Henrietta Lacks got for that? Guess how informed Henrietta Lacks was about that this had happened? This was a white doctor cutting a piece of her, figuring out this was actual gold, and not even cutting her in on the profits. Didn't even tell her. Referred to the cells as HeLa cells, as in H-E, Henrietta, L-A, Lacks. Black people have been victimized by science. And the whole point of his video was, I'm not going to tell her that it's wrong, that she's wrong, that black people have been victimized by science. Far from it. She's right. What it tells me is that the way to have this conversation with her is to rely on facts and to talk about, because she's not coming at this from, they hate black people because of a thing I read called Tuskegee. This is a woman who has taken this information in and has formed a worldview that's not without precedent. And so his response was, accept that that's true. Don't try and tell her that she's wrong about science, because her lived experience is she's right about science. Instead, talk about the actual, the disease and the vaccine and what the correlations are with, provide actual facts and hope that she chooses to take. This is one of those scenarios where I'm actually quite okay with, if somebody says, I'm not getting vaccinated, and this is their reasoning, I'm not going to tell them they're wrong. I don't agree with them. I think that that's a wrong answer, but they've come to that validly. Anyways, it was an interesting thing. Where were we? And then history's awesome. The lesson will be repeated until learned. Yes, this is absolutely true. I would hope that we're starting to learn it, but I don't hold out a lot of hope for any of these things. I think in today's society, it would be really unreasonable to assume that a scientist was going to infect you with syphilis and study you because of various checks and balances in place. But that's a very Western-centric perspective, because there was a Chinese researcher who was doing work with CRISPR that was beyond unethical and got him in a world of trouble. CRISPR is a gene splicing tool. And he was doing some very bad things with gene splicing. I don't know the details, but what little I know, fuck. Sugar, maybe the Alabasters just said that they thought it was contagious to create hysteria. Totally. I would not at all be surprised by that. We absolutely have every reason to be concerned about experimentation, black and indigenous, after all they've done. But I saw a lot of Alabasters. Saw a lot of Alabasters getting it, so I was like, okay, this ain't, they ain't out to murder Becky and Jonah, so I got the shot. I get it. Again, from the indigenous perspective, I'd love to be like, oh no. Let me tell you how science is. but we've done some bad. We've done some bad, and we've lost some faith along the way. That's valid. There's some real, like, there's some going off the deep end type of things in that regard. Like I mentioned this week I did a live stream where I did a video where I was talking. No, it was a live stream. I don't know. Fuck, it was something. I was talking about the LA punk show that Andrew from Channel 5 went down to. This like 5,000 people gathered and had a big punk rock show right in the middle of COVID. There was a moment that really made me uncomfortable, and it was they got a group of black men on the camera, and one of them said, "No, I'm not getting the vaccination. Vaccines are how they gave us AIDS," referring to that AIDS came from Africa through the polio vaccine. The story of the polio vaccine, super frustrating, and I personally I don't believe that HIV came from the polio vaccine. In fact, I think that is 100% wrong. But, like, how do you say, no, you have to trust scientists when the next thing out of their mouth is the Tuskegee Experiment or the HeLa cells or any number of things? Like, we've shot ourselves in the fucking foot way too many times. And I get why people might be a little bit shy on taking our word for it. And indigenous people, I know, there's a fairly uncomfortable history of doctors sterilizing women. And there's probably a lot more that I don't know about because I'm a honky. Everyone needs to take an ethics class. We've come a long way with ethical medicine. I totally agree on both those things. I feel like there's a lot of classes that everyone needs to take that we aren't taking. And I that to me is a real fucking shame. Oh, I got a comment here on Facebook. Our house is not against the vaccination. We just think there's not enough science information on long-term effects on the body. I'm gonna argue that. I get where that comes from. We actually have a lot of long-term data on vaccinations in general. We even have long-term data on COVID-based coronavirus-based vaccinations. We built vaccines for various coronaviruses, including SARS and MERS. And that's the thing about this particular set of vaccines is we're building on existing data. And we're doing better and better, and we understand it more and more. The mRNA concept is a massive game changer when it comes to vaccination. And our ability to react immediately when a new virus appears. COVID-19 was a new virus, but not an all the way new virus. It's a modification of coronavirus. So we had like a blueprint that we could start with, and that was a huge benefit in terms of our being able to develop something quickly. But it's also a huge benefit in terms of our understanding of what those previous vaccines that we're leveraging had in terms of reactions. Is there a guarantee that that doesn't mean that we're all going to get Guillain-Barré syndrome and die? Absolutely not. It is ridiculously unlikely because we actually have a vast amount of science that we're building off of, that we understand the work that we're doing. That's not to say always trust scientists, because don't. But in this case, in the case of vaccinations, I'm personally very comfortable with the idea of getting I already got my first shot. I will get my second shot. There's a lot of things that they're doing that I'm not comfortable with. They're talking right now about sort of mix and match. Like if in 4 months minus however long time I go for my second AstraZeneca shot and there is none, and they're like, well, yeah, we've got some data that says you can have the Pfizer or the Moderna or whatever. I'm leery of that just because that feels like we couldn't possibly really get what that potential reaction looks like. I could be wrong. Again, I'm not a virologist or an immunologist or a guy with an itchy side. Oh no, I'm that last one. So good. But like those are the things. when politicians started talking about spacing them out 4 months, when the science all said, take it in 2 weeks, a lot of people reacted poorly to that. Interestingly enough, I reacted poorly to that. I was like, that's wrong. They're changing the manufacturer's plan based on the hope that this will be just fine, and I don't like that. It turns out I was wrong. This was based on previous data, again from similar but different vaccinations that we've done in the past. That we actually have data about the efficacy of waiting 4 months on based on these different modalities and things, and the data has come back. I know with AstraZeneca, they had released that at 4 months, that's sort of the sweet spot for getting the second vaccine. I think either Pfizer or Moderna just came back with 12 weeks, which is 3 months, is their sweet spot. So there is something to be said there. But in terms of long-term damage, we really do have we're introducing some variables, but they're very small variables. And that's like a really important thing in my mind. I'm not telling you, don't, do as I say or whatever. Like, live your life, and I hope you guys get vaccinated. But I'm not gonna tell you have to. But I think that if you look into the history of what data we're basing all of this on, that can alleviate some of that confusion and fear. But I get the confusion and fear. I totally do. Sterilizing as recently as 2019. Yeah, I love how we keep pretending like all this shit is like olden times. Like way back in the days of the residential schools when I was in high school. I'm old, but I'm not that fucking old. I mean, I am that fucking old, but I'm not that fucking old. They don't even give you the virus. They give you a shell of the virus, so your body will recognize it and attack it. That's what keeps us from dying from it. In the case of the mRNA virus, we're not even giving. I don't know the specifics, but my understanding is that what we've essentially done is we've isolated what is the hook of the virus, the thing that would attach to a cell, and that is unique and all that kind of jibber jabber. So that's what we're actually injecting you with, is this disembodied hook for all intents and purposes. The virus is not live. It is not capable of making you sick. It's capable of your body having a reaction to building up antibodies to it, but it is not that whole concept of live virus. Like one of these right-wing schmoodles claims that he got COVID recently and he got it from vaccine shedding is the word that he used. So someone got the vaccine and they were shedding the virus and that made him sick with COVID. Impossible. Vaccine shedding isn't a thing because these are not living viruses that we're injecting you with. And you can shed a virus. If I was sick with, for example, COVID-19, I would be shedding the virus. If I got a dead thing stuck in my arm, I would not be shedding new dead things. That's just not how the world... Even if I somehow managed to shed the vaccination out, which doesn't even make any sense, that shedding would be a dead thing that can't infect you. So that argument, the whole fucking... it's really important that we get... We're not injecting anyone with live viruses. We're not... That would be a dangerous experimentation. There's some cool shit they've been doing with all, like, I'll give you an example of with programming. So the cold virus is a remarkably effective monster. It is super good at getting into you. It is super good at infecting you and making your life miserable for a couple days. Researchers at, I believe it was the University of Alberta, have designed a cold virus that they basically take, they biopsy someone with a tumor, and they use CRISPR and they come up with the genetic sequence stuff, and they then write a thing that the cold virus actively looks for that genetic sequence and attacks it in the way that it would attack, red blood cells or whatever the fuck they. I'm not a virologist, but this was so effective it almost killed people. When they delivered the first little bit of this, they do all the kinds of testing and stuff. They got a really big tumor, and they they did the biopsy, programmed the virus, unleashed it in the body. Guy, this thing attacked his tumor, and it was so effective. It was like a 14-pound tumor. What they hadn't really figured was that that tumor is now necrotic tissue, and it turns out body's not so good on having necrotic tissue. So now they're trying to come up with the appropriate amount of how much surgery, how much virus time or whatever. How do we balance that for the best possible outcomes? But this is such an effective treatment for the cancer that it killed this guy, like almost overnight, killed his 14-pound tumor, which presented its own problems. Where are we here? My mother was sterilized after I was born against her will. They wouldn't let her leave the hospital with me until she got the operation. It's fucking sick. Like, that is just fucking sick. And I feel like that's the easiest take in the world. Like, no one should ever have a moment in their head where, like, hey, should I force sterilize this person? No, you fucking shouldn't. I'm so sorry. Here's a funny game. I wonder what color the doctor was. Bender, so I wound up contracting COVID a week after the shot. No way do I believe the shot caused it, but it sure helped fighting it. I don't want to think of how I would have fared without it. 100%. I read on your Facebook that you were going through that. I'm glad that it helped you fight it. And that's the thing is, at least you had a week of your body knowing sort of, starting the process of prepping you against this. Because, that's a bitch of a disease. Anyone that says it's a cold, that's a person who's never had this disease. Like, this is a fucking monster. Even if you survive and get, have no long-term effects, it's generally speaking, if you get symptoms, they're shitty symptoms. A lot of people don't get symptoms. Some people get really light symptoms. I have friends that live across the street from me from the music community, and they were telling me that the feller is a teacher in public school system, and so he had students who got sick. He got sick, and his girlfriend got sick. She had very mild symptoms for a day or two. Her words were, I had to keep making sure he was breathing for 2 weeks. Like, that's fucking not a cold or a flu. Fuck off with that stuff. Sugar says, did you fully recover, Bender? My friend got out of the hospital a week ago and had to learn to walk again. Holy shit, yeah. There was a buddy of mine who was telling me about a guy that he works with. He's also a teacher. A guy that he works with in the States had like permanent neurological damage when it came to walking. He can walk, but he is not able to, like, his walk is dramatically affected by this. I was watching this nut job on a live feed who was basing his not getting a shot on this report made by one of the inventors in the States, and apparently after letting the shot gestate, it formed living organisms. I couldn't stop laughing at him. Yeah, like, how do these people get a microphone? I don't understand. This is such... I had a pile of dead cells, and then they lived. That's not even a thing. That's just so... No. It's not a zombie. That's not real. Like, I have not seen the data to refute this, but I refute it fucking anyways, because that's an extraordinary claim. And until you show me some fucking numbers, not you, Bender, but like, that person probably needs to fucking show some evidence or shut the fuck up. Bender was cleared by AHS this morning, was delirious and in and out of consciousness when he first got sick. He's okay now. Still a bit of a cough, but if that's my worst for wears, then I'm lucky. I'm sorry to hear about your friend. And then my kiddo, when Abby got COVID, he didn't have symptoms, but mom was really mad at him for going to a COVID hotel. She was worried the government would bomb the hotel. Cam. On the topic of divorce, there's a fucking protest outside my place by the Schumer. Yes, yes. Is it a protest for freedom? A freedom protest? Because of the freedom that's being taken away from people by protecting them from a virus? Is it freedom? I bet it's freedom. Thank you very much for watching. I appreciate all the support. If you want to support me directly, you can like, subscribe, or comment, or follow whatever doohickeys are available to you at this particular moment. I also have a Patreon if you want to support me via that. I have a whopping 2 patrons. One of them is my good friend, Mr. Shithead Dave Anderson, who gets the super special I love you, thank you for the videos. And the other one is my friend Kelvin, who just gets a regular thank you. It's not my fault. That's how the tiers work, which is actually exactly my fault. Anyways, thank you for watching. Thank you for taking the time. And I hope whatever you do, I hope our paths cross again. And I hope you have a great day.